Hello and welcome to the second of our pre-budget chats, where we are trying to look at tonight the biggest issue before Arun Jaitley is how he revives the India growth story. Let me introduce the panelists once again. Dr. Omkar Goswami, economist and founder of CERG, Sir Kirk Advisory Private Limited. Sunil Alak, chairman of SK Advisors. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, senior fellow of the Center for Policy Research. Lord Meghnad Desai, well-known economist. And Sanjeev Sanyal is author and he's a global strategist at Deutsche Bank. And taking us through this conversation is our political editor, Navika Kumar. So Navika, once again, let's start with you. If you look at the last 7 or 8 quarters, we have been growing at less than 5%. And Arun Jaitley will be measured by what he can do to revive the growth story. Where will he start?
That's right. He's really looking at reviving the growth story because there are two parts to this. One is that India definitely needs an increase in employment because that's where the challenge for this government really lies, and that's the diktat that has been given by the Prime Minister to him. I can also tell you that there have been 3 rounds of meeting between the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister with their officials in the run-up to the budget. So the big picture is really the increasing of employment because that is the domestic audience that they have to address. Right. Apart from that, as you said, manufacturing industrial growth has come to a virtually crunching halt in the last few quarters, and that is something that they'd be looking at reviving. And of course, FDI has been something that's been plummeting really in the last part of the UPA, and that is something that both Narendra Modi and the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley would want to revive. So these are the 3 areas that they will be addressing, and when he makes his budget, he'll have at the back of his mind what he can do in each of these 3 areas to actually revive the India story, because he needs to take it to the world, and he's already said that mindless populism is not what he's going to go in for.
I remember that, where he said that mindless populism results, he said if you indulge in mindless populism, you burden the exchequer. You then expect the finance minister to impose higher taxes. You expect him to reduce the spending power in the hands of the consumer. I want to take that to Omkar, and let's take it forward. Let's have a free-flowing conversation among all of us. Omkar, what will, in your view, what will cheer India Inc? Tax exemptions or a reform agenda? And let's take it a little specific between these two. Which ones will matter more in your
question? A very quick point, because you started on a very serious note. 8 quarters of sub 5% growth. I think it's very important to realize that even if you are full-fledged into reforms, it will take 2, maybe even 3 quarters to have higher growth. And I'm not talking of 7-8%, I'm talking of even 5.5% to 6% growth will take 3 quarters down the line, if not 4. Because what has happened, Arnav, and this is very important, that over the last 3 years, we have done everything to ruin investor sentiments and to ruin the investment climate of India. We have the worst growth in capital formation, and without capital formation, you don't get GDP growth. It's as simple as that. Now, regarding the 2, whether it's going to be SOPs or whether it's going to be a hard budget, I think if you start really looking at the numbers very carefully and see how much fudge Mr. Chidambaram has done over the last 2 years, including the interim budget, you will have to appreciate that Mr. Jaitley has to come up with a credible hard budget. You can come up with a lot of reforms. You can come up with a lot of reforms. You can make serious reform intents in the budget, but it will have to be a hard budget. And one more thing before I end. The realistic number of the fiscal GDP will be more, fiscal deficit will be more like 4.7, 4.8%, not that rubbish 4.1 that Mr. Chidambaram put in his interim budget. So it's going to be a hard budget, it has to be.
Yeah.
And it has to be a reformist budget. The 2 are not at all out of sync with each other.
You know, can I just, I'll say take off with what...
Follow-up question.
What Omkar has just finished saying, I'm not going to repeat that, but the 2 areas are the current account deficit and the fiscal deficit. The fiscal deficit he will have to manage by either cutting subsidies as well as expenses, as well as what he's paying to everybody and making them work harder. Current account deficit can only come through increase in exports or the improvement in our exchange rate because dollars have to come in. The third is the perception for the foreigners to bring in the money. Look what has happened since he's become Prime Minister. In 1 month, we've got as much FDI as the government got in the whole of last year. So he's already given that base, that the amount of money that has flowed in purely because he's become Prime Minister. The nation is at this
That's a pure post-election rush. Don't hype
No,
that.
whether it's post-election or not, in
Don't
1
hype
month
that.
you've got...
It's a pure post-election.
All right, take a look at what has happened to your fiscal deficit. In 2 months, you have spent 45% or whatever you were planning, whereas last year it was 30%. So look at what Modi is being given. A bad monsoon, he's been given a fiscal deficit where 45% has already been spent in April and
No,
May
I think we are
before he
moving
comes
away.
in. Therefore, one second.
We are moving
Arnab,
away.
Arnab, we are not going to... Let me finish
Sunil, we are moving away. My basic
One
question is very
second.
simple.
In that environment...
The World Bank...
In that
Sunil, just hear me.
environment, I
the
agree.
World Bank lowered India's growth forecast for 2014 to 5.5% from
But-
around 6.2% estimated in
Arnab,
January.
can I just say that
It's
if
a
he
bad
gives
story.
a transparent plan
You had 8
in the
successive
budget,
quarters
which
of
is the
sub
plan for
5% growth.
the plan for the next
Question
3
is
years,
very simple,
people
Sunil.
will write this lower thing. Exactly what Omkar and I are saying. If the plan is clear, that this is what we are going to be doing over the next 3 to 4 years. This is the direction we are taking. This is what we are going to work towards. I don't think industry is going to look for sops. They want a clear plan. They want something that, all right, if Mr. Modi is saying this is what the plan is, he's going to execute it. That's all I'm saying.
I take your point. You need to present a 3 to 4 year plan
That's right.
in this budget. Rajiv wants to come in. Meghnad Desai, Sanjeev Sanyal. I'm happy the discussion is getting warm, but I'd request everyone, let's stay to the subject. The challenge is how do we revive growth?
Now, first
Simple.
short point.
Yeah.
There has to be two objectives: growth and controlling inflation. Otherwise, the people will rise up in revolt.
Yeah.
Second point is that growth can grow up either by spending more government money or by inviting more private investment. And because he is in a tight fiscal space, all of us know that he has to do whatever has to be done to increase the private investment and private capital formation in the country.
Without a doubt.
But here comes the crunch, which is that for doing this, India Inc. continues to ask all the time for more fiscal concessions.
Yeah.
But that's just not possible.
Yeah.
So what Mr. Jaitley has to do is to present some credible fiscal numbers to begin with, enhance his revenue sources, enhance his revenue so that he gets more fiscal space, and focus really much more on that. Reform the direct tax administration so that the private capital feels for the first time that they're not going to be harassed and hounded and so on, and create the environment for private investment to take roots in this country.
Exactly.
Now, but most important, Arnab, he has to explain his strategy to the people of this country that a current bout of some bitter medicine is actually just a short bout, and without which you will not be able to get back to the growth trajectory.
All will be forgiven, Rajiv, and Meghnad Desai, Sanjeev Sanyal, coming to you now. All will be forgiven if you can create jobs.
That's
if you
right.
can, if you can create employment, and Arun Jaitley says repeatedly that you have to open up investment in all sectors which create jobs.
But on just that one pointer now, which is that to create jobs, perhaps the most important thing here would be to expand exports and to aim for an ambitious target like going for $1 trillion in exports in the next 5 years. And you can do external
let's
learning.
talk about investment.
And for that,
let's talk about investment. We'll talk
place.
export. Well, let's talk about investments. We talk about cumbersome legislations. We talk about an unstable tax regime. Yes, okay. Tax terrorism as
is
Arun
what Arun Jaitley has referred to.
Meghnad Desai, coming to you, Sanjeev Sanyal from Singapore.
Yeah, so the real problem here is very simple about jobs. You have had a very peculiar Indian growth model which has generated jobs and economic growth essentially in the services sector. But you have a situation that 50% of the employment is still in agriculture, which only generates about 13% of the economy. So what you have to really do is to change this model in such a way that you get the industrial sector expanding again and create jobs, which requires you to move to a much more East Asian type growth model, which is about deploying of investment, deploying of millions of people into the workforce. So essentially what you need from Modi and Jaitley is really a shift in India's growth model to a much more Chinese and East Asian style growth model.
I take your point, but where does he start, Meghnad Desai? Or what are the things? Let's look at it this way, Lord Desai. What are the things which dissuade investors?
Yeah. No, listen. First of all, our labor market needs drastic reform because manufacturing will not grow unless we reform labor markets. Now, Narendra Modi has decided that he doesn't want to go to the path of legislative reform at the union level, but he will encourage individual states to reform the labor laws. Now, Maharashtra has done some beginning with it, Gujarat has done. Now, if Jaitley can speed up, give a signal that the government wants to speed up labor market reform, then you'll be able to have really large-scale manufacturing units in India, which we don't have, unlike Bangladesh or Malaysia or Indonesia. So our biggest problem has been for the last 20 years, really very strict hiring and firing conditions in the labor market, too many inspections, too much bureaucracy. So he has to give a signal that manufacturing will be released from these constraints. Secondly, I agree with Omkar Goswami and everybody else. The budget will have to be very tough because I think the real deficit numbers for fiscal 15 are not even going to be 4.7 as Omkar said, but it's going to be much more above 5. The mess that Chidambaram has left behind is a very serious mess. So no SOPs, no concessions to corporates, nothing like that. You'll have to bear something until the next budget in February. Thirdly, I think growth will revive faster.
One second. Navika and Rajiv want to come to you. I'm letting them in. Lord
Let me finish. Let me finish. Okay.
Lord Meghnad Desai, you're talking about a 4.8 fiscal deficit going over 5. That's going to be something that's going to bring in the downgrades, and that's going to make borrowing abroad much more expensive. So that is not something the finance minister is likely to risk.
Navika,
can you please listen to my explanation? Can you listen to my explanation? Chidambaram's vote on account, real deficit implied by that vote on account is 5.5. So Jaitley will have to do something about revenue raising or divestment, massive divestment, to be able to bring the number down to 4.5. That's what I'm saying. Chidambaram has left a huge mess behind, which is why the budget will not be very, very tough.
I'm letting two counters come in.
Lastly, can I say one thing? Lastly, can I say one more thing? That because of the logjam in policy process in the last 3 years, if the government can relax those logjams, create the conditions by which those projects can resume, projects which have been tied up without producing anything due to delivery of coal, infrastructure, and so on. If they can fix that, then the growth will revive faster than most people think.
So, but
I think growth will be 6% by next year.
You're the economist, and many economists hold this view, and Omkar is responding, Omkar Da, that let's tolerate a higher deficit. Let's focus on growth. And Navika says you can't do that because the foreign credit rating agencies are going to look at the budget fine print to decide our ratings, and that's going to determine how much money comes in. Contrary to you from Mumbai, from London we're going to Mumbai. Sanjeev after that.
What Navika
High
said.
deficit doesn't get
I also have a contrary view on this.
Just a very simple point, Arnav.
It's a fallacy.
The country and also the people who rate the country's debt and the sovereign debt position are looking forward to some truth telling. If very clearly Mr. Jaitley shows why there has been a huge amount of fudge on the budget, and I'll give you just one. On fertilizer alone, there is a massive amount of amounts that have to be paid to fertilizer companies which were not paid simply because if you don't pay, then there is no expenditure, right? And there are many others like that. So I think it's extremely important that he has to say the truth. And if he says the truth and says, as Meghnad said, that would take it to above 5, I am trying to strive to keep it at 4.7, which, while higher than 4.1, is higher than a completely fictitious mythical number which was created by my predecessor. And this is how I plan to do it, and these are the reforms that I shall do. I do not believe, in fact, I'm willing to bet my bottom dollar, however small that is, that it will not affect credit ratings.
I think
what
that's
is-
the sort. That's a.
See, what-
Well,
I
would-
can we
I would
get a
agree
view
with
from
that,
Singapore
actually.
quickly? Can we just
In
get a view
fact,
from Sanjeev? Coming.
Let me add to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this idea that somehow credit rating agencies and foreign investors will look at one particular year's deficit and will freak out is actually wrong. What they would much rather have, as Dr. Goswami just pointed out, is to look at some truth telling, basically clear transparency about what is the real state of affairs as far as the fiscal is concerned, and then be given a roadmap, which could be a 5-year roadmap, where you show how things are being improved over time. Nobody is asking that in suddenly 1 year this fiscal deficit is radically reduced. In fact, if anything, if you suddenly reduce this deficit too fast in an environment where growth is still very weak, you will stall the economy. So people understand that. So
Exactly.
what you really want is a clear roadmap, and that roadmap has to include things other than what, as I said last week, other than what is purely fiscal. So this has to be labor reforms and many other things. I mean, not just labor reforms, simplification of the tax system, for example, which will get growth going. So unless you have growth going, the tax base will not increase, and you will keep debating this every year after year after year.
No. So at this point, the debate therefore is, and Sanjeev, you are in a good position to say that. I mean, given the job that you do this on a daily basis. So I appreciate that you're actually backing up Omkar Goswami and saying let's do some truth telling. But at the same time, Rajiv, what people will want, I'm sorry to keep you waiting, what people will want is a clear signal. All that we are hearing actually from all of us is give the global community, give industry clear signals. Give them a clear signal on tax legislations, on GST, on whether you are going to have disinvestment, give it a renewed push, what your time frame for that is, which sectors you'll open up for key investment. I mean, that's the kind of talk that many investors would want to hear. Will Jaitley do that? Will he get that far?
I think he has to do that.
You think he has to?
He must do that. But you see, the point we must all remember is that a large fiscal deficit, even if comes out of as a result of truth telling, will spook the markets.
You think it will?
Absolutely.
Yes, it will.
So therefore, he has to, because
your view is completely
because he does not have fiscal
Not at all.
space. I completely disagree, because if the numbers go up to 5.2 etc. and are not accompanied by a very clear, strong revenue mobilization effort.
That's not what he's saying. That's not, Sanjeev is saying,
not the current
give
situation.
me a revenue mobilization
that's what
effort.
he's saying.
I haven't heard that. You see, but I haven't heard that. What I'm saying is that this budget must include clear reforms of the tax system, which will improve the revenue mobilization from direct tax, especially.
Yes.
And this investment, because if he does not do that, the fiscal deficit is going to go through the ceiling, and whatever truth telling you might do, the market and the investor expects the finance minister to exercise fiscal prudence and fiscal discipline and show clear signs of that.
But you're also trying to look at a long-term story.
No,
Meghnad Desai coming to you, limited time. Let's keep it rolling. Sunil Alagh was a little uncomfortable with what was being
we are
put
forgetting
a while back. What was making you uncomfortable, Sunil?
Yeah, the two biggest employment generators are expenditure on infrastructure and the SMEs. The big guys don't give so much of employment in India. So as long as the government begins the infrastructure spending and encourages SME, that is where the employment comes in. And I will now bring in a contrarian view. Everybody's talking about labor laws. Tell me which company which decided to downsize had a problem in India. None of them. Whether there are laws or whether there are, of course I'm saying we should get clearer laws. But don't make that a big hawa about that is what is preventing investment. That is not preventing investment at all.
You talked about labor laws. You talked about labor laws. You're not repeatedly talking about labor laws. That's not the story, Sunil Alagh said.
Yes, I can tell you what. No, yeah, it is not firing people that Sunil Alagh talks about. We don't have factories of 1,000 and 2,000 people that Bangladesh and Malaysia have. We don't have them. This is where you're going to employ the rural surplus labor. You're not going to employ them in fancy auto parts manufacturing. All India has is medium to high-tech manufacturing, small units with a lot of contract labor. This is not the way of manufacturing
Therefore,
growth.
infrastructure
Manufacturing
and
growth comes
exports will
from
take
very,
care of
very
it.
large units.
So infrastructure and exports will take care of it.
Goods like Bangladesh, Malaysia, Indonesia do.
But they're
and
all
that is what we
exports.
have not done. So
Medinath, they are
I'm
all
saying
export
labor laws
industries.
don't matter.
So, okay, let's
Labor
not
laws
narrow
do
focus
matter.
on labor laws.
do matter, and we have not had manufacturing growth for 20 years because labor laws have not been reformed.
Why not take the exemption up to 8 lakhs, then have a 10% tax between 8 and 20 lakhs. Beyond that, you have a 20% tax rate till 30, and then beyond that 25. That's the peak rate, and get rid of every single exemption.
And will not be acceptable. To have a
Sanjeev,
tax
I
exemption
agree with
of 8
Rajiv.
lakhs
It's not.
Look,
in a
right
country
now the rich are
which
not
has
paying
something that you can do this year.
67,000 rupees is just not going to be, just
is-
not going to wash. Our
So- I
tax
agree with
to
Rajiv.
GDP ratio is already very low.
No.
What he can do is that what Mr. Chidambaram
This
said last
socialist
time,
idea
that super rich are only 43,000 people in this country. He can tell his tax people that number should be doubled. Now that's where I would agree. But to raise the exemption limits will actually be seen as again
Why not?
pandering to the middle class and not taking care of the poor.